As the Money Burns is an original podcast by Nikki Woodard. Based on historical research, this is a deep exploration into what happened to a set of actual heirs and heiresses to some of America's most famous fortunes when the Great Depression hits. Each episode has 3 primary sections. Section 1 is a narrative story. Section 2 goes deeper into the historical facts. Section 3 focuses on contemporary, emotional, and personal connections. Story recap. As Barbara Hutton and Doris Duke prepare for their upcoming debutante balls, Huntington Hartford and Cobina Wright try to distract themselves from the scandals brewing around them. Now back to As the Money Burns. All that remains. A great fortune doesn't always lead to happy endings. The future isn't always bright. Before the heartbreak begins, come take a glance to where it all might end. Section 1, Story. Plunging deep into the dark tunnels leading to a secret lair, a young hero brandishes his sword ready for the dangers ahead. When he reaches his destination, he is overwhelmed and blinded by a glittering mountain of gold and jewels, on top of which a large dragon sleeps. To the side, a fair maiden is trapped waiting for true love's kiss to rescue her from eternal slumber, and the hero to bring her back to the real world for the happily ever after. The hero is entranced but can't decide which he wants more, the love of a beauty or the security of wealth. He treads carefully forward until he makes a mistake, knocking over a treasure and wakening the dragon. The hero raises his sword, plunging it into the dragon, which screams in fury, blowing out fire and flails backwards to its death. The hero climbs up to the princess and gives her a kiss, her eyes fluttering awake and trying to make sense of her whereabouts, the sparkling gold coming in and out of focus under the torchlight. Suddenly, curtains fling open and a bright, blinding white light floods a barren room with a hospital bed. The patient shifts slightly, still fairly unconscious. It's a different sort of slumber. A caretaker hovers near the patient and makes some bodily adjustments in order to administer some medication. A hand hovers over the lips and pushes a pill inside the patient's mouth. Water is squirted into the invalid. The bedridden patient breathes laboriously as the heavy eyelids droop back into unconsciousness. The IV is replaced and more medication added through the bag. In another area, more office or den-like environment, another set of hands writes out a few checks. Some are for regular life maintenance, like bills. Others are more sizable and possibly suspicious. Lavish gifts purchased. Expensive artwork bought. Why would someone potentially on the brink of death be on a shopping spree? A few priceless objects are sold. Money counted and stacked. Envelopes of cash exchanged. The patient remains alone in the bedroom with an occasional attendant checking the vitals. The world is blurry under the haze of drugs. The warmth of sunlight envelops the patient as the day progresses and fades away. Occasionally, a document might be put in front of the patient, who's forced to shakily sign. Not in agreement, while drool forms along their mouth. Who is the patient? He or she is one of many, far more than those whose stories are currently being told. Alas, 2 patients are rescued from their circumstances, while 2 are not. One's ashes are scattered over the Pacific Ocean, and the others are entombed in mausoleums next to grandparents, spouses, and children. Once death finally visits, wills are contested, estates are re-examined, and battles begin as those with hopes of gaining fortune fight over all that remains. Section 2, History and Historiography. A grand fortune has one small hitch. You can never take it with you. Even situations of far less means can result in bitter fighting over imaginary or real assets. But when it is well known and well expected to be a sizable inheritance, and with so much at stake to lose or gain, then don't be surprised to learn of the abuse, heartbreak, and tragedy that comes with it. The fortunes covered in our series were chosen for many reasons, and in particular because of the circumstances also involved in their ends. Out of the 5 main inherited fortunes, 4 will face the situation above. It wouldn't be hard to find the truth in the hard, cold facts, but that leaves open the question as to what was the individual journeys that ended in those destinations. Isn't money supposed to provide security and comfort, especially in the golden years? Of course, there was always a certain disregard and objectifications of our heirs and heiresses due to their substantial net worth during their lifetimes. A prize trophy catch sort of treatment, something to be conquered, or the desire to be pampered like their treasured pet. In their younger days, as is the primary focus of the podcast, there's a certain panache in these pursuits. Yes, there were blatant, callous, and greedy attempts, but there were also games of seduction, wits, intrigue, and definitely a little drama to it all. A little riot and thrill in the pursuit and chase. But in their elderly years, all those suave, sophisticated, and occasionally charming maneuvers are replaced with clumsy and downright cruel machinations. Extremely parasitic, not only is there no care for the host, but an intentional willingness in hoping the host dies. A life and fortune depleted and discarded. How did these glorious and magnanimous fortunes end in such misery? One began self-medicating long ago, even before booze and drugs. Overgenerosity and overspending was the norm when seeking others' approval. One was suckered in by sex, then drugged, but was luckily rescued only to live a lesser quality of life thereafter. One sequestered after a bad medical procedure, and sadly was so detested and cut off before then that no one could interfere in time. One was rendered helpless by dementia, yet devotion and publicity led to legal action not just for the individual, but a larger movement and campaign to save others. The culprits in our scenario? A lawyer, a butler, a spouse, an adult child. And what happened with those plundered and pilfered estates? 2 were nearly penniless by the end of their lives. In all, there were charges of estate tampering, 2 with more legal inquiries. Why weren't they more protected? Where were the other relatives or concerned friends? They existed, but didn't have enough pull. The links or legal rights of kinship weren't enough. As well, other circumstances might have came into play, like prior losses of potential heirs who predeceased their parents and who might have otherwise have protected or rescued them. One child lived barely a day. Another died in a plane crash, a suicide, a drug overdose. Those left to pick over the remains might not have had the same solo or clear inheritance rights that provided the original recipients of their great wealth. The sizable fortunes were tied up in disputes and lots of accusations amongst those claiming their portions. Some of these controversies preceding the deaths included daughter and ex-wife versus stepmother, grandson versus son, his own father, a transvestite potentially impersonating the heiress versus her reincarnated child. Decades later, one of the fortunes led to another financial abuse scandal along with child abuse allegations. And those are the end-of-life scandals, not the ones throughout life. Greedy ex-spouses, bitter family members, envious friends. I'm not going into the specifics now because it would be too much flooded with details, and any basic curiosity would uncover these little mysteries. I will in time divulge more, but right now I want to remind you that fairy tales are really nightmares. The endings might seem perfect, but the journey is not. Extremely large fortunes seem more cursed than blessed. And like a fairy tale or myth, the legend of a fortune is more like a dragon's hoard in real life. There will always be those seeking and trying to claim it for themselves. They will find any rationale to justify their actions, whether for glory or goodwill. In the past, the stories of dragons include hero epics Gilgamesh and Beowulf. 2 of the more famous literary dragons, the Nordic Fafnir and Tolkien's Smaug, can speak and are more villains than mere monsters. They are meant to be killed by the heroes. They have more significant purpose and characterizations than their previous bestial counterparts. It might seem odd to talk about mythical and literary dragons in a story about actual people, and yet poignantly relevant. Those possessing great fortunes are often treated like dragons, either to be feared or slaughtered. They might be greedy or the target of greed and envy. Come on, why are there so many hero journeys battling dragons over their hoard of gold? Also, dragons were often seen to be guardian maidens. Does any of this seem allegorically familiar? Those with great fortunes, especially young heirs and heiresses, might be imprisoned in their castles and towers, sequestered from those trying to attack or rescue them. Seriously, there was a kidnapping plot based on the idea of fulfilling the sexual fantasies of one heiress in hope she would be generous with her bounty afterwards. Only there's a flip side near the end of their lives. The heirs and heiresses could be accused or seen as hoarding their wealth. They are still targets for attack, and in frail physical conditions, might need to be rescued themselves. Yet they can be vilified and mocked. It's hard to understand if there can ever be a balance involving the predatory nature surrounding fortunes. Sometimes it can feel like a slaughter of a large game on the Serengeti, where every animal goes through the pecking order, lion, hyena, vulture, to smaller predators and eventually bacteria. Or in other instances, a whale carcass causing a shark feeding frenzy. Thus, the situation when the heirs and heiresses become elderly can be even more problematic. After a lifetime of fending off every form of money grubbing from everyone and anyone in their circles, cognitive, emotional, and/or physical impairments might leave them highly vulnerable to abuse, lashed out against for real or perceived slights, and their fortunes plundered for those who finally have access with very few, if any, restrictions. Sadly, this type of end in someone's life tale is not as rare as we'd like to think. There are plenty of ongoing examples and more yet to come each year. Estee Lauder left to rot in a decrepit mansion while her family waited her death. Frank Sinatra forced to perform in his latter years despite his dementia. Casey Kasem, Larry King, Mickey Rooney, Stan Lee, B.B. King, to name a few of more recent public celebrity financial and elder abuse scandals. False imprisonment, confinement, denial of basic necessities like food and water, unhygienic conditions, physical and emotional abuse, sometimes sexual abuse, neglect. Regardless of their means, 1 in 10 of the elderly are the victims of abuse. Most will involve the control and/or misuse of their financial resources. Elder abuse is perpetuated only by 21% strangers in the classic scam artist manner. 18% are by those in legal or professional caretaker positions, while the vast majority at 55 to 60% by family members, and 2/3 of that is by adult children or spouses. This very serious crime results in $2.6 billion in losses a year. Within our 4 cases, one became so high profile that it is still leading modern legal reforms. An unintended but important legacy with far more dire consequences than all the charities and other causes supported throughout life. Section 3, Contemporary and Personal Relevance. Didn't I warn you that fairy tales always have a dark side? For me, their end-of-life scenarios resonate so viscerally after having watched several loved ones go and succumb to terminal illnesses. Watching up close another's pain and dignity stripped in those medical situations is heart-wrenching. And here we have similar situations induced for financial gain. It makes me furious. It's like Munchausen by proxy, though lacking a serious psychological disorder, inflicting pain on a weaker or weakened individual. Only this is even more calculating and devious, with absolutely zero regard for the individual, with the intention to hasten their actual death. Are we supposed to remain detached and glib because it is happening to a wealthy or prominent person? Is envy and greed so omnipotent that it would justify schadenfreude even in these conditions? I want to point out that these fortunes were inherited at a young age. Why? To alleviate that oversimplification and justification that they could have deserved their fates. The primary characters did not build their wealth through duplicitous and callous means, but they are subjected their whole entire lives to others pursuing their money at their physical and emotional expense. A life of wear and tear and constant hypervigilance of trying to protect oneself while trying to survive and thrive in the world. Only these heirs and heiresses didn't really have a chance. People criticize their wealth and what the outside view as options. Those people are unable to understand the fishbowl reality and constant bombardment that would take down even strong and resilient people. These heirs and heiresses lost their primary parent at a young age, spent their youth and adult life fending off multiple attempts to steal their fortunes despite damages to their hearts and psyches. And in the end, they are left helpless as their fortunes once again are the only thing people cared about more than their own lives and well-being. This isn't a pity play. This is reality, as in actual real life, not a hyper faux veneer. The pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, and for them, happiness never came nor stayed. Next, when we return to As the Money Burns, summer is in full swing in Newport, though the crash has definitely taken its toll on this year's colonists. Many wait in anticipation as the unlikely debutante of her season prepares to come out during none other than Tennis Week. Until then. As the Money Burns is an original podcast written, produced, and voiced by Nikki Woodard, based on historical research. Archival music has been provided by Past Perfect Vintage Music. Check out their website at www.pastperfect.com. Please come visit us at As the Money Burns via Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Transcripts, timeline, episode guide, and character bios are available at asthemoneyburns.com.